Welcome to Notebook 16. This is the final notebook in the first section of this course. The notebook is called Prompt Templates, and in this notebook you're going to learn how to capture reusable LLM functionality in prompt templates and begin working with the powerful prompt template tools provided by LangChain. By the time you complete this notebook, you will appreciate both the need and the ability to capture LLM-related tasks in prompt templates, and you're going to be able to create reusable prompt templates with LangChain. Furthermore, you'll be able to use prompt templates to perform a variety of LLM-powered tasks on a collection of provided text samples in a little bit of a mini project you'll be completing at the end of this notebook. Per usual, we're going to be importing Chat NVIDIA from the LangChain NVIDIA AI Endpoints library. But for the first time, we're going to be importing something else from LangChain. This time, we're going to be importing Chat Prompt Template. This LangChain core here is, as the name indicates, one of the core libraries of LangChain. The LangChain package API has changed a little bit over the last couple of years. So sometimes you'll see chat prompt template and example codes coming from maybe a slightly different location in the LangChain packaging. But as of the time of creation of this, towards the end of 2024, this is where you would expect to find the chat prompt template inside of LangChain core. I guess it's also worth mentioning, behind the scenes when we pip installed for this environment, these here are two different libraries. We had to pip install LangChain NVIDIA AI Endpoints, and separately we pip installed LangChain core. Okay, so with Chat NVIDIA, and per usual, we're going to create an LLM instance that we'll be using in this notebook. So let's talk a little bit about one-off tasks versus reusable functionality. So if you're the end user of an LLM-based application, especially a chatbot like Perplexity or ChatGPT, then you may very well undertake a process of iterative prompt development to elicit a response from the LLM-based application that's ultimately helpful to you. If, however, you are engineering prompts for use in an LLM-based application that you are building, then it's often the case that you want to develop a prompt that captures some task or functionality and that can be reused with a variety of inputs. As a developer or an engineer, you're already deeply familiar with the progression from one-off tasks to more generalized templated functionalities. There's so many ways that you do this, but just as a simple and universally relatable example, consider the following example of calculating the products of two numbers. If you just needed to perform a calculation in a one-off manner for yourself, you could simply write a line of code and get, for example, 99 times 64. If, however, you wanted to capture some more general functionality, say multiplying two numbers together, and wanted this functionality to be able to be reused across a variety of inputs, you would write something like the following function, multiply two numbers, where you could return a times b. And at this point, you could do the original calculation by multiplying the two numbers. But furthermore, you could reuse the function for an arbitrary number of calculations, including those deemed useful by users other than yourself. Right? Okay, so to be honest, part of this also has to do with the ability to parameterize these values and pass them in from elsewhere, because of course we could just use a star with any two numbers. But I think you get the idea. You've surely had this experience in a lot of programs that you've written where you do something once, no problem, you just do it once. But then pretty soon you realize you want to do it more than once and template out or parameterize out part of what you're passing, the overall process of functionality. So you define a function that allows for the inclusion of parameter arguments, etc. So in the context of LLMs, we're going to think about prompt templates basically as reusable functionality. And in prompting, it's not so different. If you have a one-off task, you just write a prompt for it. For example, here's a one-off prompt. Translate the following from English to Spanish. Specifically, today is a good day. All right, so we're going to invoke our LLM. We're going to pop off the content. We're going to use this one-off prompt. And you can see, no problem, the translation of today is good from English to Spanish is hoy es un buen día. If, however, you want to create reusable functionality, you might abstract part of the prompt away into arguments, right? So that you're left with something you could reuse with arbitrary inputs. Here's an example. What if we create a function called translate from English to Spanish that expects as its only argument English statement? We're then going to return a Python f string, right, which is going to allow us to conveniently parameterize part of the string. And just like we did in our one-off task, we're going to say translate the following from English to Spanish, provide just the translated text, which is a slight modification here, right? But then instead of actually providing an English statement, we're going to say that this English statement will be passed in at the time of function calling. Right? So just to show how this works, here's a list of 3 very simple English statements. And now we're going to create a list of prompts by looping over them and passing each of our single English statements into our translate from English to Spanish function that we created. And in doing so, we've now got 3 different prompts, right? Translate the following from English to Spanish, provide just the translated text, statement 1, statement 2, statement 3, okay? Furthermore, with this list, we can now send it in as a batch to our large language model. And then if we wanted, we could loop over the results and see we get translations from all 3. Okay, so our translate from English to Spanish function, therefore, creates a prompt template, right? We just created a prompt template. And what it does is it captures the overall functionality of translating an English statement to Spanish, but allows us to parameterize or pass in the specific part of the process, which is the actual English statement we want to get translated. Now, of course, we could abstract even more out of our prompt and create an even more general template if we wish. So here we're going to create an even more general function called translate, where we're also going to parameterize the language we're translating from, the language we're translating to, as well as the statement itself. And here now we can invoke that with a parameters. We're going to say from English to French using the statement computers have many languages of their own, right? And that works just fine. So we just did some prompt templating, right? And we can already see the value of being able to do that. Now let's talk a little bit about LangChain's chat prompt template from template method. So there's nothing inherently wrong with developing your own convention for creating prompt templates, as we just finished doing. But LangChain ships with a very large collection of templating mechanisms that are easy to use. They're super flexible, they're well maintained, and they're widely adopted. And additionally, there's some things that it does for you under the hood that we didn't do in our own prompt templating convention above that turn out to be pretty helpful. Okay, so we're going to start, like I mentioned, there's a lot of these ways to templatize prompts using LangChain, but we're going to start with perhaps the most basic way to create prompt templates for a chat model, which is the chat prompt template from template method. First, we need to import it, right? We did this above at the beginning of the notebook, but just for the sake of visibility and keeping it fresh to your attention, we're going to import it again here. And now what we can do is we can create a template. And this template's going to look very much like we did above in our functions with the creation of an f string, right? But it's going to be a little bit different. So here we're going to say an English to Spanish template. We're going to use chat prompt template from template, and we're going to pass it in. In this case, we're going to use a multi-line string. We're going to say translate the following from English to Spanish, provide only the translated text. And just like with the f string, we're going to put it what we want parameterized or what we want templated in between these 2 brackets. So as you can see, it's pretty much identical to the f string we returned from our translate from English to Spanish function above. So now that we have this prompt template, if we want to create an actual prompt with a specific value from the template, then we can use the template's invoke method, right? And so here we're going to use our template. We're going to invoke it with an actual English statement, right? We're going to capture that value in a variable called prompt. And in fact, if we look at prompt, which I think we ought to do, you can see it's a chat prompt value. We're going to look more at this below, I guess, and you can see the content of it is this here, right? And we can actually take that, pass it into our LLM as part of its invoke method, and you can see we get the translation back, no problem. Okay, so I'm realizing now why I didn't cover prompt here, because we talk about it here more explicitly, and let's do that now. So if we look more carefully at the prompt we just created from the template, we're going to see that there's a bit more going on than the creation of just a string, right? You can see it's actually something called messages, and it's got a list of messages, even though in this case it's a single list. And this element inside the list is something called a human message, and it has a content property that's the actual prompt, excuse me, that we passed in. All right. So you're going to be learning a lot throughout the workshop about messages, right? We have messages here. We have a human message here. And we alluded to this at the beginning of the course. But you will be learning more about them, including human messages. But for now, just recall from that earlier notebook, when you began interacting with our local LLM through the OpenAI library, that we had to take care to interact with the chat completions endpoint, given that we were working with a chat model. And furthermore, that when constructing our prompt, we had to include some additional structure to our prompt, including the creation of a messages list and the specification of our prompt as being associated with a user role. So just to remind you of all that, again, you can look back to that notebook, Hello OpenAI, number 12. But this is what it looked like for us to send a simple prompt to the LLM using the OpenAI library. The important thing for you to understand right now, right, is that when working with chat models specifically, the model expects interactions via messages in a turn-based structure where for each message, it's associated with a specific role, roles like AI assistant or human user. There's some other ones as well, which we'll be looking at eventually. Okay, so it makes a little more sense now, right? We talked about this at great length, that instruction fine-tuned chat models are not just about finishing sentences, right? They're about interactions. And in order to have an interaction, you need to have more than one thing that can interact. And it's helpful in the context of being some sort of assistant to an actual human user that it's assumed which role people have, a role like a user, a role like an assistant, etc. Okay? So you can see that under the hood, LangChain has taken care when we used its prompt templating to specify, right? We won't worry too much about the syntax right now, but to specify that our prompt is in fact a human message, right? So this is one of the great things about working with LangChain is that a lot of the specific formatting that's actually required to adhere to the expectations of working with a chat model, especially using the OpenAI API, they're already taken care of for you, right? But additionally, at the same time, when you need to, and we'll be doing this later, you can drill down for full control of your program, right? So it's kind of the best of both worlds. It's really quite nice. Okay, so we looked just now at how to do a single value prompt template and how to invoke a model with that prompt template when we only parameterized a single value, right? But now we're going to take a look at how to do that with multiple values. Okay, so just for reference, because we took a little bit of an aside, right? Here's the entirety of what we just did in the previous section of